Hello, Miss Pneumatic here. Today we are going to learn about the structure and operating method of double-acting solenoid valves. In our last video, we learned about the single-acting solenoid valve and the basic structure and operating methods of solenoid valves. Don't you want to know about the internal structure of double-acting and how it operates? Let's learn right now with an animation. We will now take a look at the structure of the double-acting solenoid valve. To help you understand, let's first take a look at the single-acting solenoid valve structure that we learned about in the previous video. We learned that the main components of solenoid valves are solenoid coils, plunger, spool and sealing, piston, valve body, spring, and a hidden pilot hole, right? We will separate the spring and end cover from the single-acting solenoid valve. And then let's attach the right side solenoid coil, plunger, and piston on the left. Then, this completes the double-acting spool-type 5-port solenoid valve structure. Easy, right? If a single-acting solenoid valve has a solenoid coil on one side and a spring on the other side, then the double-acting solenoid valve has coils on both sides. Then, let's see how the double-acting solenoid valve operates through using this structural diagram. To help you understand, let's first compare it with the single-acting operating principle that I showed you in the previous video. The single-acting type pushed the piston and spool to the left by the fluid supplied while currents flowed in the coil. But when the current was stopped, the piston and spool was returned to its original location by the internal spring and supply pressure. The moving piston and spool return due to the spring and the force of the fluid on the opposite side as a structure to move side to side. The double-acting type has solenoid coils on each side instead of springs. This gives it a structure to shed current in turn to move the piston and spool. First, let's send an electric current to the solenoid coil on the left. Then, the plunger on the left will be pulled toward the coil due to the magnetic force created in the solenoid coil on the left. The compressed air being supplied through the pilot hole will then flow in toward the piston through the hole between the piston and plunger, and thus push the piston and spool to the right. So, if you look at the fluid flow when there is a current in the left coil, compressed air is supplied through the first and second ports, and the compressed air is discharged through the fourth and fifth ports. The third port blocks the flow. Let's send a current on the coil on the right. The plunger on the right is pulled toward the coil, and the compressed air supplied through the pilot hole flows in toward the piston through the pilot hole, and the piston and spool are pushed to the left. As the spool moves to both sides, the direction of the fluid flow changes, and the compressed air is supplied through the first and fourth ports, and discharged through the second and third ports, and the fifth port blocks the flow. I will send the current to each side. You should be able to understand what principle the solenoid valve uses to switch the fluid flow direction through this animation. Let's now connect an actual pneumatic cylinder to the double-acting solenoid valve and move it. The test materials include the regulator, double-acting solenoid valve, pneumatic cylinder, and power supplier. First, with the power of the coil testers on both sides still on, I will send a current to the solenoid valve coil on the left. The plunger located on the left created by the magnetic force created in the solenoid coil will be pulled toward the coil. The compressed air supplied through the pilot hole flows in toward the piston through the hole between the piston and plunger to push the piston and spool to the right. So when you look at the flow of the fluid, when there is a current in the left coil, compressed air is supplied through ports 1 and 2, and the compressed air is discharged through port 4 and 5, and port 3 blocks the flow of the fluid. The compressed air that passed the first and second ports goes in toward the head of the cylinder and moves the cylinder rod forward, and the air in the cylinder rod is discharged through ports 4 and 5. Now let's do the opposite and send the current to the coil on the right. The plunger on the right will be pulled toward the coil. The compressed air supplied through the pilot hole will go toward the piston and push the piston and spool to the left. As the spool moves as such, the flow direction of the fluid will be converted and compressed air will be supplied through ports 1 and 4, and it will be discharged through ports 2 and 3. Port 5 will be blocked. The compressed air that passed ports 1 and 4 will go into the rod and push the piston inside, and the cylinder rod will retreat. The compressed air in the head will be discharged through ports 2 and 3. I will now activate each side one at a time. So today we learned about the structure and operation method of double-acting solenoid valves, following the single-acting last time. Please press like and subscribe if it was helpful. You can leave any questions in the comment section. Thank you!
Miss Pneumatic Channel is working together with KCC Precision.